I remember the silence more than the words. The silence of the church vestibule as the last echo of Sunday's choir faded into the wooden rafters. The hush of stained glass shadows dancing across my son's face. That hollow quiet before the storm of what had been done fully struck me. It was Pastor Ron who called. His voice wavered, uncertain, apologetic in a way that made my bones go cold. "He's here," he said. "Daniel's here, alone. He said his grandparents dropped him off. Said he was supposed to wait for you." My breath caught mid-step in the grocery store aisle, just as I reached for a jar of peanut butter. I left the cart behind. I don't remember the drive, just the feeling of my fingers gripping the wheel like it might anchor me to a world that had gone mad. There he was. My Daniel. 9 years old, brave and bewildered, clutching a comic book I'd bought him on his last birthday. His eyes lit up when he saw me, but there was a tremble in his smile. "They said you'd come," he whispered. "They?" "My parents." It started with a phone call 2 months before. My brother, the golden child with the Midas touch and a heart full of rot, needed $45,000. "For a business opportunity," he said. "A sure thing." They'd co-signed loans for him before, when he tanked his real estate venture, when he tried to start a distillery, when he got sued for breach of contract. Each time, I was the one who bailed them out, not because I had excess, but because I was raised to believe loyalty was love. But not this time. "No," I said firmly. "Not this time." They didn't scream. They didn't plead. My mother's voice, as even as a knife's edge, simply said, "Then I suppose you've made your choice, haven't you?" 2 weeks later, Daniel was gone from his after-school program. My phone rang off the hook. Unknown number. Pastor Ron. I never imagined the people who rocked my son to sleep as a baby, who smiled in family portraits beside us, would abandon him like a package marked return to sender. That night, I held Daniel close in our small apartment, tears hot and helpless on my cheeks, while he slept, finally safe again. I tried to understand the depth of their cruelty. But some betrayals defy logic. They exist only to test the threshold of your endurance. I filed for an emergency protective order the next morning. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that I had spent the past 2 years quietly building a case. Every manipulation, every coerced signature, every bank withdrawal that mysteriously disappeared when I refused to question them out loud, I had it documented. I had letters, emails, voicemails. I had receipts. And now I had their crime, child endangerment, hand-delivered to a courtroom. The judge called it egregious. He used words like malicious intent, psychological harm, and reckless disregard. He looked at them over the edge of his glasses like they were insects pinned to a board. 2 months after that day at the church, the verdict came. I'll share that moment in part 2. But know this. There is a silence after the storm, too, the kind that follows justice. A calm that settles into your bones when the truth finally stands tall. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. Everything was beige, walls, benches, even the faces of the people who sat in judgment. But when I looked over at my parents, the color drained from their world entirely. They didn't wear guilt the way innocent people do. They didn't shift in their seats. They didn't lower their eyes. They sat upright, proud, as if this were a board meeting gone inconveniently off course. My father's tie was straight, navy blue like his old Marine uniform. My mother wore pearls. Always the pearls. Even now. My name was called first. "Ms. Carter, please state your relationship to the minor child and the nature of this petition." My voice didn't shake. It surprised me, the steel of it. I stood with Daniel's favorite toy clutched in my bag, a threadbare stuffed lion he once told me was the only one brave enough to sleep when it's storming. I spoke of the abandonment, of the betrayal, of the calculated cruelty. I handed over photos, Daniel sitting alone on the church steps. Text messages from them. Voicemails. Records. And I told the judge this wasn't a mistake. It was punishment. Their lawyer, a smug man with an expensive haircut and the emotional range of a stapler, tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding. Temporary custodial confusion, he called it, as though they had dropped Daniel off like a borrowed library book and simply forgotten to pick him up. Then came my parents' turn. My mother looked at me when she stood. Not at the judge, not at the room, just at me. Her voice was calm, controlled. We acted out of love. Our daughter has always been dramatic. She exaggerates. That was her line. Even after everything, she needed the last word to be a discrediting one. My father cleared his throat. We didn't harm the boy. We left him somewhere safe. At a church. Somewhere safe. As if that was the metric now. The judge leaned forward, his gaze hard as granite. You knowingly left a 9-year-old child unattended, without parental consent, at a location where no arrangements for his care had been made. You then made no effort to retrieve him. Is that correct? My father's mouth opened, but nothing came. Silence again. The verdict came after an hour's recess. I didn't sit during it. I stood by the window, watching clouds crawl across the sky. I thought about the day I gave birth to Daniel, how I had labored alone, how my mother had texted, "Good luck," and never shown. I thought about the birthdays they skipped, the holidays spent with promises that never arrived in envelopes or doorways. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge's voice was clear and final. Permanent restraining order is granted. Petitioners shall have no legal visitation or custody rights. The court also finds sufficient grounds to pursue further investigation into financial misconduct and fraud as submitted by the plaintiff. Court is adjourned. My parents didn't move. For a moment, they sat frozen, two statues carved from denial and privilege. Then my mother reached for her pearls. My father muttered something under his breath that I didn't bother trying to decipher. Daniel wasn't there that day. I had asked my friend Marisol to take him to the Science Museum instead. I didn't want him to see them in that room, to feel that ache. But I wished he could have seen their faces. That night, he fell asleep in my arms on the couch, tired from exhibits and popcorn and stories. I watched his chest rise and fall, steady and sure. And I thought, this is the child you threw away. This is the boy who will rise from your ruin. And as I tucked the lion under his arm, I whispered, "You're home now. And no one's taking you from me." In the weeks that followed, the world did not stand still for my pain. Bills still came. Work deadlines still loomed. My alarm still went off at 6:45 a.m. sharp, just in time to pack Daniel's lunch and braid the stubborn cowlick out of his soft, chestnut hair. But under the surface, everything had changed. There was a strange stillness, like the aftermath of an earthquake where the air feels too light and the floor too solid, as if the earth is pretending nothing happened. I walked through life like that, shattered and composed. Daniel didn't ask about them. Not once. But I caught him checking the window some afternoons, as if half expecting someone to appear with apologies and explanations wrapped in ribbon. Children, even hurt ones, still want to believe in magic. I, however, had no more illusions left. What I did have was paperwork. Investigations. Court filings. My lawyer, a quiet man named Everett with eyes too kind for the work he did, called me 2 weeks after the custody hearing. "They've begun liquidating assets," he said. "Bank transfers to overseas accounts, the sale of a vehicle, moving property titles into shell corporations." I closed my eyes. Of course. If you corner people like that, the ones who always believe the rules don't apply to them, they don't take it as defeat, they take it as delay. Everett continued, "But what they didn't know was that your mother's name is still listed on one of the condo deeds. You flagged that in your financial abuse filing. That gives us leverage." I didn't speak. I was thinking about the Christmas 5 years ago when they gifted me that condo, only to rent it out and pocket the money while I struggled with postpartum depression in a 1-bedroom rental above a nail salon. Everett's voice softened. "You've done well, Olivia. This isn't just about revenge. It's about truth. And safety. I thanked him, hung up, and went to check on Daniel. He was in his room, painting. He paints now. That's new. Not the chaotic scribbles of toddlers or the primary colored swirls he brought home from kindergarten, but real painting. Watercolors mostly. Landscapes. A field with lavender. A cabin near a lake. Things we've never seen in person. I don't know where he finds them, his dreams, maybe? Or somewhere beyond where I can reach. Is that for school? I asked, leaning in the doorway. He didn't look up. No, it's for me. And in that moment, I saw it, how he had begun, without my knowing, to stitch together the frayed edges of his spirit. Children heal like that. Slowly, quietly, with whatever tools they're given. I vowed that day to give him more than silence and survival. I would give him color and laughter and mornings without fear. I would give him stories where he was always the hero, because this wasn't just about what they did. It was about who we would become now that they were gone. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name in sharp cursive. Inside was a photograph. Daniel at age 3, sitting in my mother's lap, both of them laughing. On the back, 2 words, "We miss." No signature. No apology. I put the photo away. I didn't burn it. I didn't frame it. Some things belong in drawers. Some wounds don't scar. They stay tender forever. But I had more important things to tend to, like a boy with a paintbrush and a future with a door no one else would ever walk through again without knocking. 2 months passed before the full silence settled. The kind that seeps into your bones when the noise of conflict fades and all that's left is the echo of choices made. My parents hadn't reached out again. Not a call. Not a letter. Not even one of those cryptic emails they used to send. The ones meant to sound loving, but always ended with a guilt-laced reminder of all I owed them. This silence was different. Heavier. Not peace, exactly, just the absence of battle. Sometimes that's worse. Daniel stopped looking out the window. He stopped asking if we'd see them at Thanksgiving. When he saw other grandparents at the school play hugging children with 2 large bouquets and tearful eyes, he didn't flinch. He simply slipped his hand into mine, quiet as breath. That night, I found him in the living room with a shoebox on his lap. "What's that, baby?" "Memories," he said. Inside were scraps, a crumpled birthday card from my father that read to our little man, a broken snow globe from a trip to Maine they once took him on without asking me, a rock painted to look like a ladybug that my mother helped him make for Earth Day. Bits of a life that once promised belonging. "Do you want to keep these?" I asked gently. He nodded. "But not in my room." So I found a place in the closet, behind the holiday decorations and out-of-season coats. A quiet spot, not thrown away. Just placed where it couldn't hurt. That's the thing about grief. You don't always purge it. Sometimes you just relocate it. Meanwhile, the financial investigation was picking up speed. Everett informed me that multiple accounts had been frozen. The judge approved a forensic audit. There were whispers of felony charges if certain documents confirmed what we suspected, that they had not only forged my signature on mortgage applications, but also used Daniel's name, his social security number, to open a line of credit. I felt sick. They used my son. Not just abandoned him, but indebted him. I told Everett I wanted to press charges if the findings were verified. He asked if I was sure. "You'll be burning the last bridge." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "They burned it. I'm just making sure they don't use the ashes." It was late that night when Daniel found me at the kitchen table, papers spread around like a battlefield. He climbed into my lap, his weight a familiar anchor. "Are we safe now?" he asked. That's what it came down to. Not love. Not family. Safety. I kissed his forehead. "We are. I promise." And I meant it. But I also knew that safety isn't just about locks on doors or restraining orders. It's about freedom from the ghosts that linger long after the damage has been done. So I made another promise that night, one to myself. We would not live in reaction to their cruelty. We would live in pursuit of joy. It started small. I signed Daniel up for art classes at the community center. I registered for a financial planning course I'd been putting off for years. I painted our apartment in warm shades of yellow and blue. We started cooking together, burnt pancakes, lopsided pizzas, and once, a casserole that even the dog refused to eat. Laughter returned. Slowly, stubbornly. It curled around us in the quiet hours and took root. Because even when you're born from broken branches, you can still grow toward the sun. The morning Daniel came to me with the lion, I knew something had changed. He held it out solemnly, his old stuffed lion, the one he clutched when the world felt too loud or too empty. Its fur was worn, one button eye missing, the stuffing in its leg escaping like breath from a wound. "I don't need him at night anymore," he said. I blinked, caught between pride and grief. "Are you sure?" Daniel nodded. "He's tired. He can rest now." I took it gently, as if the lion might shatter from the final transfer of duty. He had been the keeper of Daniel's nightmares, the quiet companion during those months when we didn't know if love was enough to stitch a child back together. And now his job was done. I set the lion on a shelf in the hallway. Not hidden, not discarded, just honored. Later that week, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror while brushing Daniel's coat before school. Something stopped me. It wasn't my reflection, not exactly. It was what I didn't see anymore. The hunch in my shoulders, the flinch behind my eyes, the silent question of whether I was enough. Gone. Grief had carved me into something different. Not smaller, not softer, but sharper, defined. Like a sculpture finally freed from the marble that trapped it. I wasn't the daughter they remembered. I wasn't the vessel of their expectations or the fallback bank account or the good girl who kept her mouth shut for the sake of keeping the peace. I was a woman who had stood in court and told the truth. A woman who raised a son to choose kindness even when the world didn't. A woman who had lost almost everything that tethered her to the family tree and found her roots anyway. That day, I emailed Everett. "I want to pursue full restitution," I wrote. "Not out of vengeance. Out of justice. For my son. For the future they tried to steal." He replied within the hour. "Understood. I'll begin drafting the formal demand letter." The letter would be the first of many dominoes to fall, a chain of consequences no apology could halt. But I didn't flinch. Not anymore. That evening, Daniel and I baked a cake. No reason. Just because. He cracked the eggs, badly. I cleaned up the shells. We watched it rise through the oven door like a miracle you almost expect to fail. When it was done, we each took a slice and sat on the floor, cross-legged. "Mom," he said, chewing. "Yeah, baby? You're braver than the lion." I smiled. "You are too." He nodded. "But I needed you first." And I thought about how so many women carry that same truth in silence, how we become the first brave thing someone else ever sees. How we endure so that others may begin. Later that night, I wrote something in my journal, words that had been circling for weeks without form. They abandoned a boy. They awakened a mother. The demand letter was crisp, formal, legal. It outlined, in meticulous detail, every cent taken, every forgery traced, every tax lie whispered into my signature. Everett delivered it with the precision of a surgeon and the weight of a gavel. My parents would have received it by certified mail, complete with the familiar envelope bearing his firm's golden crest. I imagined them reading it, my father's jaw tightening, my mother reaching for her pearls like they were rosary beads. Them realizing, too late, that the daughter they'd sculpted from obedience had learned how to wield power quietly. There was no response for 5 days. On the 6th, Everett forwarded me an email. Subject line, "Without prejudice." Inside, a message from their lawyer offering mediation to avoid escalation. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just veiled concern for reputational damage. An invitation to negotiate, as though what they'd done could be reduced to accounting errors and bad judgment. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I laughed. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't cruel. It was the sound of something breaking free. A tether. A silence. A spell. Because I saw it now. The same pattern replaying. Pretend civility, the avoidance of shame, the desire to control the narrative without ever taking responsibility for the wreckage they left behind. I told Everett no mediation. We proceed. He didn't argue. Instead, he attached a second document, a witness list. And there, to my surprise, was the name of the woman who used to be my mother's best friend, Agnes Ward. Agnes, who hadn't been invited to a single family gathering since she confronted my mother about how she treated me during Daniel's first birthday party. Agnes, who once pulled me aside and said, "You don't have to earn their love, Olivia. It's not real if it has to be purchased." I hadn't seen her in years. Everett said she came forward voluntarily. She's prepared to testify about conversations she overheard, documents she saw, including one where your mother allegedly forged your signature on a second mortgage. She says she kept a copy. I sat in stunned silence. Not all voices vanish. Not all witnesses stay quiet. That weekend, Daniel and I went for a walk by the lake. He skipped stones while I sat on a bench, hands tucked in my coat, heart thrumming with a strange blend of vindication and grief. You'd think winning would feel like triumph. But really, it just felt like finally being believed. "I miss when things were simple," Daniel said, tossing a pebble into the water. I looked at him. "When were things simple?" He thought. "When I thought everyone was who they said they were." There it was. The betrayal under the betrayal. It wasn't just what they did. It was the lie that wrapped it. The illusion of family, safety, love, all dismantled by their need to control, punish, and rewrite history. I touched his shoulder. "We'll build something better. Something true." He nodded, but didn't smile. And that was okay. Some truths don't comfort. They simply clear the path. I once read that scars are not a sign of weakness, but of survival. Skin that has remembered pain and come back stronger, even if it never looks the same. Mine runs deeper than skin. It lives in the memory of a voicemail I'll never delete, though I'll never play it again. The one where my mother said, "Maybe next time you'll think twice before biting the hand that feeds you." As if betrayal had been a lesson. As if abandonment had been a gift. That same voice now sat behind polished courtroom glass, silent and paler than I'd ever seen her. The trial had begun. Not with fanfare or fireworks. Just paperwork and the rustle of documents. But beneath the surface, a storm gathered, one I had waited a lifetime to weather. Agnes took the stand first. I wasn't prepared for the emotion that surged through me when I saw her, a woman once exiled for telling the truth, now returning like a soldier with receipts. Literally. She held up copies of my forged signature. Emails between her and my mother. Statements made in confidence, now stripped of privilege and placed under the light. She told me Olivia would never fight back, Agnes said. That she was too soft. Too dependent. That she needed to learn a lesson. The courtroom was still. The judge scribbled notes. My parents didn't look at me, but their attorney stood and asked Agnes whether she had a personal grudge. "No," she said, calm as ever. "I just know what it's like to watch a child become invisible inside their own family." It hit like a bell toll in my chest. That was the thing I'd never been able to say in words. Not really. That invisibility is not about being unseen, it's about being deliberately looked through. Treated like an accessory to someone else's narrative. And now? Now I was rewriting it. When the court broke for recess, Daniel and I sat in a side room, eating crackers and string cheese. He drew a picture of a lion. But this one wasn't sleeping. "He's guarding the courthouse," Daniel said proudly. I kissed the top of his head. "He's doing a good job." That night, I stood at my window long after Daniel went to bed, the city below glowing like embers. I thought of all the women who never got to this moment, who swallowed the lies, buried the grief, and kept smiling for the sake of keeping peace. I thought of the girls who never became women because they were told they were only valuable if they remained small. And I made a vow. I would tell this story. All of it. Even the parts that made people uncomfortable. Even the parts that shamed the ones who once held power. Because the scar was not the end of me. It was the beginning. The second day in court felt heavier. Like the walls had absorbed our truth and were holding it with bated breath. I sat behind the wooden barrier, watching my father prepare to take the stand. There was a time, not so long ago, when I would have crumbled at the sight of him, when his raised eyebrow alone could reduce me to silence. The man who once sat at our dinner table with the authority of a judge and the cruelty of one, too. He never shouted, but he didn't have to. His disappointment was surgical. Now, that same man sat before an actual judge, fingers drumming the table as if impatient with the process of being held accountable. He began with charm. My father was always good at that. He spun stories about sacrifice, about duty, about the stress of managing a family legacy. His voice carried the practiced inflection of a man who believed performance could still save him. She always had a tendency toward exaggeration, he said, referring to me. Olivia feels things more deeply than most. She takes things personally. I wanted to stand up and scream. Not because it hurt, but because it was so familiar. That tactic, that dismissal, that careful rewiring of facts so the listener questions their own memory. But the judge wasn't swayed. "Mr. Carter," he said, peering over his glasses, "are you denying that your signature appears on these loan applications?" My father hesitated. Just for a second. But long enough. "I don't recall signing those documents," he said finally. "Do you deny that your daughter's name appears, without her consent, on the same documents?" My father didn't answer. I did. From my seat, voice calm, "I never signed them. And I never gave permission." The judge nodded and moved on. But in that moment, something shifted. A truth settled into the room that couldn't be polished or excused. When court adjourned, I stepped into the corridor and found Daniel sitting cross-legged on the bench, sketching again. This time, it was a woman. She had a sword in one hand and a scale in the other. Classic. Poetic. "Who's she?" I asked. He shrugged. "She looks like you." I blinked. "You gave her a sword," I said. "She needs it," he answered simply. Sometimes lions can't roar loud enough. I swallowed back the emotion. He was right. And I would keep holding that sword, not out of vengeance, but because justice was a story we'd been denied for too long. Inside me, I felt the tremble of every woman who had once whispered, "That's just how they are." Of every daughter told to be grateful for crumbs while the sons were fed feasts. But not my son. Not in our house. Not ever again. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't rehearse. I walked to the stand like I was stepping out of shadow and into sun, one slow breath at a time. My heels echoed across the courtroom floor like punctuation marks. For the first time in my life, I wasn't speaking to defend myself. I was speaking to define myself. Everett had asked me if I wanted notes. "No," I said. "This has lived in my body long enough." The oath tasted like salt on my tongue. I sat, hands folded in my lap, and looked the judge in the eye. "I was raised to believe family meant loyalty," I began. "That sacrifice was love. That to question either was betrayal." The judge nodded. So did two women in the back row, strangers, perhaps. But not really. I spoke of the slow erosion. How they'd used my name to build dreams I'd never see. How they co-signed loans with forged permission and called it helping. How they turned my son into collateral for a punishment I didn't deserve. "They didn't just abandon Daniel," I said, voice steady. "They weaponized him. They tried to make a child a consequence. And that's something no apology can undo." Their lawyer objected. Something about emotion clouding fact. The judge overruled. Everett passed me a folder. Inside were exhibits, bank statements, email transcripts, notarized affidavits. I handed them over one by one. Paper stacked like bricks, building a wall they couldn't climb. And then I pulled out the final page. A photograph. Daniel, age 3, with crayon streaks on his cheeks and a grin wide enough to swallow the sun. My father had taken it. He'd framed it once. I held it up. This is who they left behind. Silence. This is the boy who waited on a church step, asking strangers if they'd seen his mother, who believed he was being punished for something he didn't understand. I turned to the judge. No child should be taught that love is conditional. No parent should have to prove their worth to the people who raised them. When I stepped down, I felt weightless. Not because I'd won, but because I had finally spoken. Outside the courthouse, Daniel waited. He was holding 2 cups of cocoa, one for each of us, even though it was spring and too warm for cocoa. He handed me mine like a torch. "How'd it go?" he asked. "I told the truth," I said. "That's brave," he said. I smiled. So is loving someone, even when it hurts. We walked home together, fingers curled around paper cups and the kind of silence that doesn't sting, but heals. Later that night, I tucked him into bed and watched as his breathing slowed. And I realized we weren't just rebuilding a life. We were building a new kind of legacy. One not written in forged documents and conditional affection, but in cocoa shared after court. In lines set aside with pride. And in voices finally, irrevocably, unafraid to roar. A week passed after my testimony, and still there was no response from them. No statement. No apology. Not even the cowardice of a voicemail. Silence is its own kind of weapon, sharpened by the hands of those who believe they can still control the narrative by refusing to participate in it. I'd learned to stop expecting anything from them, but that didn't mean the ache disappeared. There's something unnatural about mourning people who are still alive. About burying love while its object still breathes. Daniel asked fewer questions now. Not because he understood, but because he had decided to protect himself the way I once did, by going quiet. I wouldn't let him live in that same silence. So I filled our home with noise. Music in the mornings, his favorite stories read aloud with dramatic voices, and once a week, we had silly dinner, breakfast food at night, eaten in costumes. One night he was a knight. I was a pirate with mascara, beard smudges, and a colander for a helmet. We laughed so hard I forgot, for a moment, that we were still mid-lawsuit. That a judge still held our peace in the weight of their decisions. Then came the envelope. A plain white one, slipped under our door. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed. No greeting. No signature. Just a sentence. "We'll never forgive you for choosing a child over your blood." I sat down slowly, the weight of that sentence pressing on my chest. They still didn't see him as their blood. They didn't see me as their family, not unless I complied, stayed silent, played the role of daughter as apology. I folded the letter and slid it into the same drawer where I kept the photo from the church, the voicemails I'd saved, the evidence of who they really were. Daniel walked in, munching an apple. He saw my face and paused. "Another bad letter?" he asked. I nodded. He chewed for a second. "You can throw it out, you know." I smiled faintly. "I could. But you don't have to," he added. "You can keep it. Just don't let it live with us." That boy. 9 years old and wiser than most grown men I've met. That night, I pulled out the box I'd labeled before. It held the old tokens, the relics of the life I'd once tried to believe was real. Mother's Day cards with forced poetry, birthday gifts chosen by secretaries and store clerks. I burned them. Not out of anger. Out of release. Outside, the fire crackled in the grill pit. Daniel stood beside me in his pajamas, holding my hand. When the last flame flickered out, he looked up. "You feel better?" I exhaled. "Yeah, I think I do." In the sky above us, stars blinked without needing permission. We went inside, where safety lived. And behind us, in the ashes, the past stopped knocking. Grief doesn't vanish when justice is served. It lingers like smoke in the curtains, clinging to the corners of your mind in quiet hours. But something else grows alongside it, an understanding, a rootedness. If grief is the ash, then growth is what you plant in it. I started to breathe differently. Not with fear. Not with the shallow panic that used to cling to every phone call, every unknown number, every sharp knock on the door, but with intention. That month, I signed the lease on a small storefront 3 blocks from our apartment. It wasn't much, just exposed brick, a cracked window pane, and floors that creaked like old knees. But to me, it was holy ground. My own business. A children's art studio and community space. We called it the Brave Brush. Daniel helped me paint the sign. He chose cobalt blue and sunflower yellow because, as he explained, blue feels like trust. Yellow feels like hope. He was right. Our opening day was quiet. A handful of neighborhood kids, some curious parents, and an elderly woman who wandered in with knitting needles and stayed to teach a group how to fingerknit. Daniel manned the welcome table. He wore a lion pin on his shirt. The same lion we'd retired months before, now remade in enamel and purpose. I stood behind the counter, heart trembling, and realized I hadn't thought about my parents once that day. Not in anger. Not in fear. Not even in memory. It wasn't forgetting, it was freedom. Later that week, Everett called with the final ruling. Full restitution. Garnished wages. The judge deemed the acts willful, malicious, and with intent to harm. Criminal charges would follow for financial fraud. They would lose much of what they hoarded. But none of it would matter more than this. They would never touch Daniel again. Not legally. Not emotionally. It was done. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt quiet. Like standing at the edge of a lake at dawn. Still. Reverent. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It exhales. That evening, Daniel and I stayed late in the studio. He painted a garden, strange, beautiful plants blooming from a charred field. "What's that one called?" I asked, pointing to a tall red stalk. "Fireflower," he said confidently. "It only grows after everything burns." I kissed his cheek. We walked home under a sky that had no memory of the storm. The holiday season arrived with its usual fanfare, twinkling lights, too sweet cocoa, radio stations humming with carols I used to love. But this year, the weight of family tradition hung different in the air. For the first time in my life, there would be no visit to the sprawling house on Elm Grove Lane. No dry turkey carved with surgical precision by my father. No passive-aggressive toasts about success and legacy. No gift exchange where my contribution was scrutinized, while Daniel's smile went unnoticed. We stayed home. And it was glorious. I let Daniel pick out the tree. It was crooked, too short, and had a bald patch in the back, but he named it Wally and insisted it had the most heart of all the lot. We decorated with mismatched ornaments from thrift stores and his school crafts. There was no theme. No color scheme. Just memory and laughter, strung in gold ribbon. We invited neighbors over for cookies. One of the kids spilled juice on the rug. Someone knocked over a lamp. And I didn't flinch. That night, after everyone had gone home and Daniel was asleep with crumbs still on his cheek, I sat by Wally and looked at our living room, not perfect, not curated, but full. Full of what mattered. The phone rang once that week. A number I didn't recognize, but I knew its area code. I didn't answer. Some stories deserve silence. Some bridges should never be rebuilt. Instead, I wrote Daniel a letter. A tradition I decided to start, each holiday, a letter he could open when he's older. When the world feels too heavy or too complicated. When he needs to remember who he is. This year's read. You are not what they tried to make you feel. You are not a consequence. You are the beginning of everything brave. I tucked it into a small box beneath the tree. One day, he'll read them all. One day, he'll understand just how deeply he was loved, not in spite of the battle we endured, but because of it. Christmas morning came with pancakes and pajamas till noon. He gave me a painting of us riding lions into a pink sunrise. "They're going home," he said. I looked at the canvas. "We are home," I whispered. He smiled. "Yeah, we are." January brought snow, deep and clean like a fresh page. It blanketed the city in quiet, softening every sound, every harsh edge. I used to hate winter, the stillness, the isolation. But this year, it felt like the world was agreeing with me. Let things rest. On the first Sunday of the year, I took Daniel to the studio early. He was helping me prep for a new program, Art for Healing, where kids who had endured trauma could paint their way through the pain. It wasn't therapy. I wasn't a counselor. But I knew, deeply, how sometimes the right colors and the right space could say things words couldn't. Daniel taped signs to the front windows with his usual care. One read, "Here, your story matters." I stood back and watched him for a moment. My son, the boy they left behind, now giving other children a place to be seen. Later that day, a woman came in just before closing. Mid-40s, worn eyes, clutching the hand of a girl who looked no older than 6. They didn't speak much, just browsed, touched the brushes like they were made of magic. When they left, she placed a folded bill in the donation jar and whispered, "Thank you. We needed somewhere safe today." I stood there long after the door closed. We'd built that. From ash. From nothing. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, I found myself staring at the mailbox. No reason, really. Just habit. I used to check it every day, half dreading, half hoping. For what? An apology? A confession? Some kind of letter with just enough humility to make me doubt again? It never came. And on that night, for the first time, I realized I didn't want it to. What could they possibly write that would make abandonment make sense? What sentence could undo a child sitting alone in a pew, waiting for a mother they'd tried to punish? The silence had once been a wound. Now it was a boundary. I closed the mailbox, locked it, walked back upstairs, and kissed Daniel's forehead. Some people need closure. Others simply need distance. And we had both. From then on, I checked the mail less and lived more. Spring crept in quietly, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The snow receded like an apology, revealing patches of stubborn green pushing through the soil. At the Brave Brush, we switched out the winter canvases for brighter ones. The children painted bees and sunflowers, roller coasters and skies that looked like spilled lemonade. The space buzzed with noise, joy, chaos, the best kind. Daniel grew taller seemingly overnight. His voice was starting to shift, hovering in that space between child and almost not. Sometimes I'd hear him humming to himself while painting and feel an ache so deep it startled me, an ache that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with how quickly children bloom. One afternoon, I caught him scribbling on a notepad near the front desk. "What are you writing?" I asked. "A list," he said, "for next year. Of things I want to learn. Things I want to be." He handed it to me. At the top, it said, "Artist. Scientist. Brave. Kind. Someone who helps other kids feel safe." I read it twice. My throat closed. That night, I sat with a box of old photographs, the ones I hadn't burned, just buried under better things. I found one from a vacation long ago. My mother holding me as a toddler, both of us laughing, her smile radiant. I looked at it for a long time, wondering if the woman in that photo had ever been capable of what came later. Or if the rot had always been there, just dressed up in pearls and praise. I didn't cry. I simply put the photo away and pulled out another list, my own. Things I want to be. Free. Fierce. Unapologetically whole. The mother mind never chose to become. Daniel wandered in after brushing his teeth, rubbing his eyes. "Mom," he mumbled, "do you ever miss them?" I paused. "Yes," I said, "but not in the way you might think." "I think I get it," he said, curling up beside me. "You miss what they could have been." Exactly. That night, we fell asleep on the couch under a blanket of possibility. Outside, the first daffodils were blooming. And inside, so were we to BY summer. The Brave Brush had become more than a studio. It was a haven. A woman named Maria began volunteering every Saturday. She was a retired art therapist with a quiet strength and hands always flecked with paint. The kids loved her. So did I. We never talked about our pasts, not directly. But one afternoon, as we cleaned brushes side by side, she said softly, "You don't have to bleed to prove you were wounded." I looked up. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. That same week, I filed the paperwork to make the Brave Brush a nonprofit. It was a leap, one that meant new responsibilities, more scrutiny, more work. But it also meant something I hadn't let myself believe in for years: permanence. I wanted this place to last, to outlive the pain that birthed it. One morning, Daniel arrived early, clutching a rolled piece of paper. He handed it to me with a shy smile. "I made a new sign," he said. It was a mock-up for the front window, the Brave Brush, founded by Olivia Carter and Son. The and Son was written in bold, lopsided letters, underlined twice. Tears blurred my vision. Not because I needed credit, but because I had spent so long believing I was doing this for him, when really we had built it together. That night, I replaced the old vinyl sign with Daniel's version. I left the crooked underline, the uneven spacing. It was perfect. Later, while folding laundry, I found a letter in Daniel's backpack. A school assignment. "Write about your hero." He had written about me. Not with grand language or flowery praise. Just this: "My mom is brave. She fights without yelling. She builds things when they're broken. She loves like a shield. She makes places safe. She is the reason I believe in good things again." I folded the paper carefully, placed it in the same drawer as his first crayon portrait of us, and sat for a long time, letting myself feel proud. Not for surviving, but for becoming. They took so much from us, but they didn't win. They never even understood what the real battle was. Healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives in fragments, quiet moments you only recognize in hindsight. Like the day I ran into her. My mother. I was at the grocery store, comparing prices on granola bars, when I caught the scent of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the one she wore like armor. I turned instinctively, and there she was, 2 aisles over, holding a bag of frozen peas like it might bruise. She looked smaller. Not physically, though age had softened her, but something about her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way her mouth drew tight when she saw me, it spoke of defeat, of recognition. I didn't look away. Neither did she. For 3 full seconds, we stood like that. 2 women, bound by blood and betrayal, framed by freezer doors and cereal boxes. Then she opened her mouth. I braced for apology, anger, deflection, anything. But all she said was, "He looks happy." I blinked. She didn't say his name. Didn't dare. I nodded. "He is." She nodded too, as if that answered something unspoken. Then she turned and walked away, leaving behind the peas and the perfume and the decades I spent trying to earn something that was never hers to give. I stood there, hands trembling slightly, not from pain, but from relief. I didn't need her words anymore. I didn't crave the validation of someone who mistook control for love. Daniel met me at the checkout, holding a pack of gum like it was treasure. "Can we get the spicy kind?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You can handle it now." At home, I didn't tell him about the encounter. I didn't need to. Some ghosts don't haunt anymore. They just pass through. That night, while locking up the studio, I stared at the sign again, the Brave Brush, founded by Olivia Carter and Son. It wasn't just a name. It was a declaration. We had survived the fire. And now we were blooming. It was the end of the school year, and Daniel had been selected to speak at his 4th grade graduation. He hadn't told me until the night before. Classic Daniel, always guarding his moments like rare coins. "I don't have to do it," he said as we sat at the kitchen table. "But I kinda want to." I looked up from chopping vegetables. "Why wouldn't you?" He hesitated. "Because they'll all be looking at me. You're worth looking at." He smiled faintly. "You think so?" "I know so." He nodded. "Then I'll do it." The next morning, the auditorium smelled like floor polish and paper programs. Parents shuffled in with cell phones and coffee cups. I sat in the 3rd row, fingers crossed in my lap, trying not to cry before he even spoke. When Daniel stepped up to the podium, something in the room stilled. He wore his lion pin on his collar. His voice, though quiet, was steady. "Hi, I'm Daniel Carter. This year, I learned a lot about math and reading, but I also learned about bravery. Not the kind where you fight dragons or wear capes. The kind where you try again after someone hurts you. The kind where you help other kids feel safe. My mom taught me that kind." He looked at me then. A glance. A heartbeat. I hope one day I can be as brave as her. There it was. Not just the healing, but the legacy. The crowd clapped politely, moved by the sweetness of a boy they didn't really know. But I sat there frozen, breath caught between pride and something deeper, a grief that no longer hurt, only reminded. He was becoming. Not in spite of what happened, but because he saw what love could look like when it was real, unselfish, and unshakable. After the assembly, a teacher approached me. "You should be proud. He's resilient." "I am," I said. But what I wanted to say was, he's more than resilient. He's a mirror. And every day, he reflects back the best parts of a life I once thought was broken. That night, he asked to sleep with the lion again, not because he was scared, but because he wanted to thank him. And in the dark, under soft sheets, and the hum of summer fans, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you too, little lion." Because that stuffed lion had held what I couldn't. Until I could. It was a Sunday afternoon when I found the old voicemail on my phone. Buried beneath new messages and missed calls, the timestamp said it was from nearly 2 years ago, before the church steps, before the courtrooms, before the brave brush. My father's voice. Just 5 seconds long. "You'll regret this, Olivia." No hello. No goodbye. I listened to it 3 times, not because I needed the words, but because I wanted to feel nothing when I heard them. And I did. Nothing. No rage. No shame. Just space. So I deleted it. The final relic of a war I no longer lived inside. Later that day, Daniel and I were walking through the park, kicking at dandelions, when he asked something that stopped me cold. "Do you think I'll ever see them again?" I paused. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Do you want to?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe when I'm bigger. I think I want to tell them I'm okay." I knelt down in front of him. "You're allowed to choose that. You're allowed to choose everything. Who you let in. What you carry. What you lay down." He nodded, serious and sure. And then, quietly, he said, "I think I forgive them. But I don't miss them." Forgiveness. That word. So often confused with reunion, with permission, with surrender. But Daniel, at just 10 years old, had found the truer definition, letting go of the burden without reopening the door. We sat on a bench under an oak tree, watching leaves whisper to each other in the wind. I thought of how often I had tried to earn forgiveness like a prize, not realizing it was always mine to give, not for them, but for me. "I forgive them too," I said. Daniel leaned his head on my shoulder. We sat there a long time. No fanfare. No grand gestures. Just the quiet freedom of 2 people choosing peace. Autumn returned with gold-tipped trees and crisp air that made everything feel cleaner. I'd always loved this time of year, not for the pumpkins or the decorations, but for the way the world seemed to pause and exhale. At the Brave Brush, we introduced a new project, memory boxes. Each child received a shoebox, paints, glue, glitter, feathers, whatever they needed. The assignment wasn't complicated. Decorate the outside with what you show the world. Fill the inside with what you keep safe. It was supposed to be a metaphor. But children don't deal in metaphors. They just tell the truth, uncooked. One little boy painted his entire box black and filled it with paper stars. When I asked him why, he said, "Because I'm not sad, I'm just waiting for someone to notice my light." Daniel made his box out of cardboard he found in the recycling bin. It was clumsy and beautiful and covered in drawings of lions and paintbrushes. Inside, he placed a photo of him and me at the lake. The wrapper from his first art show, Lollipop. A folded paper with the words, "I choose who I love," written in his uneven scrawl. I added nothing. It wasn't mine to fill. But I did take a photo of it, and that night, I tucked it into my journal with the caption, "He is rewriting the story, one brushstroke at a time." The next morning, I found an envelope in our mailbox again. No name, no return address. I didn't even bring it inside. I opened it there, under the pale morning sky, with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer fears ghosts. Inside was a letter not typed, but handwritten this time. It was my mother's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. The first line read, "We did what we thought was best." I stopped reading. Because that sentence is the anthem of cowards. It's what people say when they want to apologize without owning the wound. When they need to believe that cruelty dressed as righteousness is forgivable because it came from a place of control. I folded it once, twice, then dropped it into the trash can beside the mailbox. Daniel saw me from the window. He didn't ask. Later, while baking muffins together, he said, "Do ghosts ever go away?" "Only if we stop feeding them," I said. We laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was finished. And that laughter? That was the sound of a house with no hauntings left. B.Y. Winter, The Brave Brush, had its first gallery night. The kids had chosen the theme themselves, "What Makes Me Strong." Parents, neighbors, even a few local artists came. We cleared out the center tables, strung up fairy lights, and displayed each child's work like it was worthy of a museum, because it was. Daniel's piece stood near the front. It was a portrait of me. I stood with paint on my face and a lion at my feet. Behind me, mountains. In one hand, I held a brush. In the other, a key. "I wanted to show that you opened the door," he said. "For me. For all of us. There are moments when the heart can't hold the emotion, so it spills out in silence." I just hugged him, held in the way I did the day I found him on that church step, small and scared, and so brave. During the event, a woman approached me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until she said, "I used to work for your mother." In the office. I braced myself. She smiled gently. "I just wanted to say I saw what they did. I didn't speak up back then. I should have." I nodded. "Thank you. I read about the trial," she said. "And this place is something sacred." Her eyes glistened. "I hope you know that." I did. But hearing it from someone who once stood in the wings of my pain, someone who had watched but now chose to witness, meant something. Later that night, after the last guest had gone and Daniel had fallen asleep on the studio couch, I turned off the lights and stood in the quiet. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to be the daughter they could be proud of, and how none of that mattered anymore. Because I had become the mother I never had. Because I had given my son a story where he was never the footnote or the lesson, but the reason for the rising.